All right, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody. Welcome to the Laser Altimetry Applications for a Changing World Working with ICESat-2 Bathymetry Data training webinar. Today's event is the third in a multi-part series of ICESat-2 specific training webinars. This is your host, Jennifer Brennan. It is 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Saving Time, so we're going to go ahead and get started here. And what I'll do first is begin today's webinar with just a few logistics. To ensure the best audio experience, all participants have been placed in silent mode. But if you have any issues or you have any questions, what I'd like for you to do is enter those into the Q&A panel rather than the chat, and you should see that on the right side of your screen. If you don't see it, you can click on the three dots at the bottom of your screen, which should pull up your panel options, and then insert a check mark next to the Q&A panel. Today's webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted to our NASA Earth Data YouTube channel within a week of completion. And then once completed, what I will do is I'll send an email to all registrants and participants that includes links to both the recording and presentation slide decks used within today's webinar. As far as timing is concerned, today's webinar will be 1 hour and 30 minutes long, with 1 hour being allocated to the presentation and live demonstrations, and then an initial 15-minute question and answer period to begin after the presentation. Depending on the volume of questions received and our end time, we may extend the Q&A session, but we will have a hard cutoff of 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. During today's webinar, we have 4 speakers. Our first speaker this afternoon, and let me actually pull up that slide for you here. Our first speaker for this afternoon is Dr. Amy Neely. Amy is the ICESat-2 Mission Applications Lead here at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. She will provide you with an overview of the ICESat-2 data training series, and then after that, we will transition to our second speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Christopher Parrish. Dr. Parrish is a professor and the Plasker Faculty Scholar in Geomatics at Oregon State University. He will provide a very brief overview of NASA's ICESat-2 mission and its measurements, and then provide a comprehensive introduction to the new Atlas ICESat-2 Level 3A along-track coastal and near-shore bathymetry dataset, which is the focus for this afternoon's webinar. Our third speaker this afternoon is Joseph Paul, or J.P. Swinsky. He is a computer engineer also at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. He will conduct 2 live demonstrations, first with a Jupyter Notebook data access workflow, and then with Slide Rule Earth. After JP is finished with this demonstration, we will transition to our final speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Anas Nudbi. Dr. Nudbi is a full professor within the Department of Geography, Environment, and Geomatics at the University of Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. He will provide several use case examples for bathymetry data based on work at the Shallow Water Earth Observation Lab at the University of Ottawa. Once he is finished, we will transition to our final optional polls and then also the question and answer period. During today's Q&A session, we also have 3 panelists from the National Snow and Ice Data Center, Distributed Active Archive Center, or NSIDC DAC, and so I would like to take a minute to introduce them. We will have Lisa Booker, who's a User Services Lead, Walt Meyer, who's the NSIDC DAC Scientist, Danica Linda Conterero, who is the User Services Rep, and Luis Lopez, who is a Data Use and Education Team member and developer. Before I toss it over to before I toss it over to Amy, I wanted to cover one final note about the Q&A session. We will try to answer all of the questions within the time allotted, but if we are not able to address your question during the Q&A period, our speakers will be able to follow up with you offline. And then I wanted to say a word about this. So I also included a resource slide here or chart. This will also be shared at the end, so not to worry if you are, trying to, note these links. We'll also share it at the end, and I'll also provide the link to you when I send out the email in a few days or so. All right, so with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Amy Neely. Amy, I am going to stop sharing my screen and then toss it over to you.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Jennifer.
You're welcome.
All right. So welcome, everybody. I am very excited about this webinar. I have been looking forward to it for a while. So I'm here to kind of give you the general lay of the land when it comes to these webinars. So those of you who've come to past webinars, this will be the same thing you've already heard a couple of times, so I'm sorry about that. But for newcomers, this might be helpful. So this webinar in particular is the third in a series that we've been creating to provide the community with the tools that they need to navigate ISAT2 data. And we hope to keep producing these events into the future, covering different topics, which I'll get into in a second. So during these webinars, there's usually three parts. First, we highlight some sort of capability of ISAT2 in a data product. We then focus on some sort of tool or workflow to use the data products, so capacity building, giving the tools to everyone. And then we want to share all the amazing things that ISAT2 can do, so we want to grow our ISAT2 community. And so this just kind of shows that again, where you're going to have some sort of data product overview. As far as the tool goes, we'll have a live demonstration of whatever that tool may be. Today it'll be Slide Rule. And then at the end, we try to have some sort of application use case so that you can understand the impact of these data products on the real world and their use in the real world. So again, we're trying to cover different thematic applications. So today we have obviously bathymetry, some other ones we have in mind and not necessarily in this order, is like sea level change, sea ice, melt ponds, and maybe some hydrology. So keep a lookout for the announcement of future webinars. And lastly, you will have that ATL24 specific slide, but I just wanted to throw this slide in here as well. This is all of the resources we have to either access ISAT2 data or process and visualize the data. So this will be in the slide deck, and I've also created a table on the ISAT2 data web page that contains this information as well. So hopefully that will help people to navigate and find the resources that they need. So that is it for me. I am excited to toss it over to Christopher Parrish to talk about ATL24. So Chris, please take it away.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, Amy. And thanks, everyone. It's really an honor today to be able to talk about our new global ISAT2 bathymetric data product, which is ATL24, which was actually just released at the beginning of this month. And I'm honored to present on behalf of a large and talented team. You can see the team members listed here. My colleague, Lori Magruder, who is a professor and director of the Center for Space Research at University of Texas at Austin. Jeff Perry and Matt Hallwell work with Lori. Kiana Keefe and Forrest Corcoran work with me at Oregon State University. And JP Swinsky is at Goddard Space Flight Center. And you're actually going to hear from JP giving a slide rule demo at the end of my talk. So first of all, just to talk a bit about ISAT2 and give a brief overview. So ISAT2 launched on September 15th, 2018. I got to attend the launch with my daughter, Catherine, which was a great honor. So ISAT2 has now been on orbit for over 6.5 years. And in that time, we've collected over 2 trillion laser shots. It's in a 500 kilometer orbital altitude, and it has just a single sensor, a green wavelength photon counting LiDAR, which is called Atlas. And for those of us working in bathymetry, it's that green wavelength, which is critically important. So ISAT2 was designed primarily for cryospheric science, including ice sheets, glaciers, sea ice, as well as vegetation heights. But it very quickly became recognized as the world's first spaceborne bathymetric LiDAR. And in terms of why that's important, so all over the world, we have these nearshore data voids. So areas between the shoreline and where we've got bathymetric data, where there are just these data gaps like you see here. In terms of what causes this, one of the key causes is the fact that to put boats in the water with sonar systems, for example, multi-beam echo sounders, that can become very inefficient in shallow waters. Also, potentially dangerous in areas that are unsurveyed, where you might have uncharted hazards to navigation. Same thing with in situ techniques, can be very time consuming, potentially dangerous. And so that leaves these data gaps that you see all over the world in coastal areas. And Anis is going to talk later about some of the reasons why it's so important to fill these nearshore data voids. So one technology which is really useful for being able to fill these nearshore data voids is bathymetric LiDAR. And bathymetric LiDAR, at least airborne bathymetric LiDAR, is a much older technology than a lot of people realize. It goes all the way back to at least 1969 in a pioneering study by Daniel Hickman and John Hogg, in which they flew in an airplane with a green laser over Lake Ontario and were able to measure water depths. So for the next 50 years after that, there was a lot of development in bathymetric LiDAR, a lot of development on the system side. So new and ever better bathymetric LiDAR systems. But for this, 50 years, roughly, the only platforms that were available for people to use were either an airplane or a helicopter. And then much more recently, uncrewed aircraft systems or UAS became an option. But it wasn't until 2018 and the launch of ISAT-2 that we first had the ability to do bathymetric LiDAR from space. And in making that jump from airplanes to a satellite, we moved up in altitude by 3 orders of magnitude, or even 4 orders of magnitude if you consider uncrewed aircraft systems. And why is that important? Well, basically it's important because by being able to collect bathymetric LiDAR in space, we get so much greater coverage. So with ISAT-2, and of course this all depends on water clarity. You've got to have areas where you've got water clarity that support measurements, but where you do, we've got coastal bathymetry coverage from 88 degrees south to 88 degrees north. And that includes the ability to get bathymetry in places that are very difficult to access. For example, islands out in the South Pacific. It also provides a lot of revisit opportunities, and that's important because water clarity is seasonal in a lot of places. So you might have, for example, an ISAT-2 overpass. You get an overpass and the water is too turbid, so you're not getting any bathymetry. And then you've got another overpass, and again, it's too turbid. And then the third time you've got that overpass, you just happen to hit that area at a time of really good water clarity, and so you get some great bathymetry. And then in areas where the water is often very clear, like in the Florida Keys, you just have the ability to get increasing coverage over time and just build up a longer and longer time series and more coverage of that near shore bathymetry. Also, it's freely available to users, highly complementary with bathymetry from multispectral satellite imagery. And Anis is going to talk about this later. And also, ISAT-2 bathymetry has just opened up an entirely new field of study. Every time I check, I see more and more publications on people using ISAT-2 bathymetry for various things. So here are some examples of ISAT-2 bathymetry. And this is not yet ATL-24. I am going to show some examples of ATL-24 later, but these are bathymetric profiles from ISAT-2 that have been hand labeled and manually processed. So the one up in the upper left here, somebody, I think this might actually have been me, went in and hand labeled the aqua points are water surface, and then the dark blue is seafloor. You can see this one gets kind of deep. The bathymetry starts to peter out at about 30 meters. However, an important point here, this profile up in the upper left, this one has not yet been refraction corrected. So basically, when we're producing ISAT-2 bathymetry, we need to account for the fact that the laser light is going to bend and then slow when it enters the water column. And so what that correction is going to do is it's actually going to move those bathymetric points up by about 25% of the water depth. That hasn't been done here, but nevertheless, in some areas where we've got really clear waters, bright seafloor, we get depths to over 40 meters with sand in some cases. So really a pretty remarkable capability. The profile that's down here in the lower right, this is a different area. So this is Caruana Island in Papua New Guinea. And here you can actually see the effect of that refraction correction. So if you're able to see the 2 different blue curves, those are both the bathymetry through this lagoon on Caruana Island. And the darker blue one is before refraction correction, and then the lighter blue is after refraction correction. But the main point I wanted to make here is this. So after ISAT-2 launched and people started seeing this great bathymetry everywhere, a lot of different researchers developed their own algorithms, tools, and workflows for extracting bathymetry from ISAT-2. And a lot of those studies were published. People showed some pretty amazing results. But unfortunately, a lot of the source code, the tools, the final data sets were not made publicly available. And so as a result of that, a lot of the sort of broad community that could stand to benefit from ISAT2 bathymetry didn't have an easy way to access it. And to address that lack, in 2022, our research team, that again is shown here, began work on a new dedicated along track ISAT2 bathymetric data product, which is called ATL24. That was supported by the ISAT2 Project Science Office as part of the extended mission. And the idea was to be able to provide global photon level classifications of the seafloor and the sea surface using ensemble machine learning. I'll talk about a bit about that in a minute. Also to be able to provide classification confidence values, refraction corrected seafloor elevations, and per point uncertainty estimates. This is a look at the ATL24 workflow. And this is actually just a simplified version of the workflow. And even in this simplified version, I'm not going to be able to talk through all the steps in great detail. So my goal here is just going to be to give you kind of an overview. But basically, we start with the main input, which is ATL03 geolocated photon data. We've got a search mask that tells us basically where to look for ISAT2 bathymetry. We do some pre-processing, a preliminary water surface detection, and then we get into the heart of the ATL24 workflow, which is down in the lower left, which is the bathymetry classification. So we use ensemble machine learning for this. So we're taking the outputs of a bunch of different classifiers. They go into an ensemble model that produces final sea surface and seafloor points. And then from there, we do some blender detection, final surface fitting, refraction correction, uncertainty calculation, and then generate the final ATL24 data product. And then there are some other layers that go into this workflow. If you're interested in more of the details, by the way, this paper that's shown in the lower right here is a great place to start. So in developing this workflow, one of the first things we needed to do was generate some data layers that we needed for ATL24. One of the first ones was the search mask that I mentioned briefly. So the idea of the search mask is this tells us where to look for ISAT2 bathymetry. And so by limiting this area, we can improve computational efficiency. You know, there's no need to look for bathymetry over the Mariana Trench or areas where it's just too deep or areas on land. So by excluding those areas, we can greatly improve the computational performance. But the big caveat is we don't want to miss potential new bathymetric discoveries. So the whole goal of creating this mask was to be able to you know, sort of err on the side of being able to get new bathymetry. And so we created a global ISAT2 bathymetry feasibility layer that was work led by James Dietrich. And from there, generated the search mask in an effort to narrow the search, but not miss bathymetry. And then the other thing that we needed was a global refractive index of water layer. So I mentioned already that we need to be able to apply the refraction correction. This image in the kind of the lower center here shows what that refraction correction does. It basically takes this red point, which is the unrefracted point, and moves it up to where up and in to where the green point is. So a key variable in that is the refractive index of water. And we found that a global refractive index of water data layer did not exist. So we created it, and that's been made publicly available as part of our ATL24 development effort. Another thing that we needed to do is we wanted to be able to produce per point uncertainties. So the uncertainties in the spatial coordinates of detected bathymetric points. And to do that, we leveraged some work that we'd already been doing in airborne bathymetric lidar total propagated uncertainty, or TPU, and a tool that we've developed called CBLU, the Comprehensive Bathymetric Lidar Uncertainty Estimator. So we took this tool and modified it for being able to do ISAT2 or ATL24 uncertainty estimates. And I've got a couple of references there that talk about the details of that. Yet another thing that we needed to do as input into the ATL24 development was to create a global training and testing database for classification of the sea surface and the seafloor returns. And to do this, we had a team of students who went in and hand labeled bathymetry in areas all over the world. So the idea was to create capture a range of different seafloor morphologies, coast types. And so, you can see an example there in the lower right where they've hand labeled sea surface and seafloor. This data set is also something that we've made publicly available. So I've got the DOI there for people who are interested. And then getting into the Ensemble machine learning model. So as I said before, this is really the heart of ATL24. This is in many ways the most challenging step, and one of the most important ones is to perform classification of the sea surface and the seafloor. The reason this is so challenging is that we need to do it everywhere. On the upper right here, this is another look at that global search mask. So if you can imagine the immense range of seafloor morphologies, water characteristics, wind wave characteristics, all of the variability that exists globally, we've got to be able to do a good job at extracting the sea surface and the seafloor across all those different conditions. And we've got to do that in an entirely automated way. So fortunately, there are a lot of algorithms that have been developed for sea surface and seafloor classification from ISAT-2, including some developed by our team. And they all work sort of differently. So the idea of the ensemble is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So basically what we want to do is we want to take all these different Bayes algorithms and models and use them in the ensemble, where the ensemble can produce better results. It can basically outperform any of the individual classifiers. And then yet another thing that the ensemble can do, which is super important, is to output a confidence value. So for each detected bathymetric point, we have a confidence on that classification. And so to show this, and I know this chart is a little bit busy here, but basically what we're looking at, this is the same bathymetric profile repeated 7 times. So the one up at the very top, that's the one that's been hand labeled by a human. So a human has gone in, and the blue points, those are water surface, and then the red are seafloor. And then if you jump down a couple rows and you see Bathypathfinder and then Seashelf and all the other following algorithms, those are all different individual algorithms or trained models for classification of bathymetry. And what you can see if you look at the results of these individual algorithms or models is that any one of them, it sort of does well in some places, but not so well in other places. So you see areas like, if you look at the median filter, it's tracking the bottom pretty well, and then you've got an area where it's sort of missing the bottom. You maybe look at Bathypathfinder, is looking pretty good in some cases, but gets a little noisy in other places. So the idea is, in the ensemble, by taking all of these different Bayes model or algorithm outputs as the ensemble's inputs, you can outperform any of the individual classifiers. And that's what you see in the second row, the one labeled ensemble. And you can see that one kind of does the best and gets closest to the manually labeled reference data. So after all of that development, we went ahead and ran all the algorithms and the classification and produced the global ATL24 data set. The processing was completed on February 24th of this year. That took 13 days to compute using Amazon Web Services, AWS, and the total data volume you can see is just under 28 terabytes. Total linear bathymetric coverage, nearly 14 million kilometers. Number of bathymetry photons, also class 40. So I should have mentioned we use the ASPRS TopoBathy ladder classification scheme. So class 40 is seafloor, class 41 is sea surface. So 7.3 billion class 40 photons. And then if we look at just high confidence photons, and those are ones for which the confidence score is greater than 0.6. So if we look at just high confidence photons, that's 4.7 billion. These and many other statistics are published in this paper. This is a preprint, actually, of a paper that we just submitted to AGU Earth and Space Science. So basically, the statistics that we covered, some of them were designed to give kind of intuition into the ATL24 data set itself. Others were designed to provide insight into ISAT2's overall bathymetric measurement capabilities, including when and where bathymetric measurement is most feasible. So all of those stats are contained in this paper that you've got the QR code to here in the lower right. So now finally, let's look at some ATL24 data. So this is an ATL24 profile for Robin Bay on the south side of St. Croix. This one extends about 2 kilometers offshore. So you can see starting at the shoreline, it crosses this reef flat right here. I don't know if you can all see as I move my mouse on the screen, but the reef flat, and then the reef crest. And then this one extends out to about 20 meters water depth. And to explain the color coding in the profile here, so in the bottom portion of the screen, we see the profile. This is done in a software package called LB360. So the aqua points are water surface. The blue points are the seafloor. And I should actually clarify. So blue points are high confidence bathymetric detections. And then the points that are shown in white, those are low confidence bathymetry. And that's kind of interesting because if you look at those points that are in white, you see some of them look like they're true bathymetric detections, and then other ones might be sea surface or maybe slightly below the seafloor. So you kind of see the value of that confidence attribute. And then here's another bathymetric profile, just another example. This one happens to be Marathon, Florida. So this one starts at Vaca Key Bight and extends, in this case, I think about 4 kilometers offshore to depths of about 12 meters. And the color scheme is the same as before. The aqua is water surface, blue is bathymetry, and then white is low confidence bathymetry. The other thing that we did is we wanted to be able to assess the accuracy of ATL24. So we used 8 different test sites for assessing the accuracy. 3 of them that I've got called out here. The accuracy of the data set when we used all bathymetric points, so all class 40 detections, RMSE was 68 centimeters. I'm using just the high confidence bathymetric points that dropped down to 43 centimeters. You can see the scatter plots, ATL24 on the x-axis, reference on the y-axis, and the corresponding error histograms. These results are also in that same paper, so same QR code. And at this point, if you're saying, wow, this sounds great, I'd like to access ATL24, where can I get it? Here's the QR code. So this is a link to the National Snow and Ice Data Center, NSIDC, where you can access ATL24. JP Swinsky is going to talk next. He's going to give a demo of Slide Rule, which is another way to access ISAT2 bathymetry. So that's pretty exciting. And then just in terms of future work, ISAT2 actually has enough mission resources for up to another decade of operations. So hopefully we'll be able to keep collecting ISAT2 bathymetry over that time. We also plan to keep this data product going and generate re-releases or new releases where we periodically retrain the base models in Ensemble, maybe add new algorithms, improve the uncertainty model, refine the confidence values. And on the research side, we want to be able to integrate ISAT2 bathymetry with other geospatial big data to do things like global classification of coral reefs, extending some work by my former PhD student, Forrest Corcoran. Some references. This is how to contact me. And with that, I will just say thank you and turn it over next.
Thanks, Chris. I will share my screen. Okay. Everyone see my screen okay? Okay. I'm just going to actually quickly, I should have done this before, but I'm going to talk about Slide Rule Earth. This is our website, slideruleearth.io. You can find out all about what we're trying to do through this website. It has links if you go to the documentation portion for all the things that we're working on. We're a web service that runs in AWS, and our goal is just to make it as easy as possible to work with ISAT2 data. So please reach out to us. We're here to serve you guys, and we're doing the best we can to make it easy to work with the data. So what I'm going to do is talk through first some options using Slide Rule to access ATL24 from Python. That's our primary way of interacting with Slide Rule is through our Python client. And then after that, I'll show you our brand new web client that just went live a couple weeks ago that we're excited about. So here I have a Jupyter notebook, and I'm going to step through 6 or 7 different ways of accessing ATL24 using the Slide Rule Python client. So the first step is just to import Slide Rule. You can install it via Conda or pip, or via GitHub if you like. There's directions on our website for all the different ways of getting access, getting the client. And then I have here, I just initialize a client to turn on verbose log messages because I find it helpful. You don't have to do that. If you don't want to, you can skip this step. And then here, you can ignore these next few cells. They're just some helper functions and variables that I'm going to use to plot the data down below, just to make it easier to see what is happening. So these functions here are just helper functions that you would have your own version of those. And then I defined an area of interest. Now I just randomly chose the North Shore of the Dominican Republic. You can have a GeoJSON or a shapefile. Here I just manually copied and pasted the latitudes and longitudes into a list. So Slide Rule accepts multiple formats. This is just one of them. So if you just want to get access to ATL24, right? You have an area, you have a GeoJSON file, and you're like, I want ATL24 bathymetry in this area. The quickest way to do it is with this one call right here. So you do Slide Rule run. This is the service, the Slide Rule service, ATL24X. This right here would be where you pass in parameters to control how you get the data. We'll talk more about that. And this is where you pass in your area of interest that you defined above. And this will go out, and you can see here, let me scroll to the top. I ran this about an hour ago, right before this meeting. This goes out and it identifies 114 granules, ATL24 granules, and then it fans out the processing of those granules across the Slide Rule cluster and starts building data frames of the data. And so you can see here, it just goes through and there's granules where it's not intersecting the region, and then we have some where we have some bathymetry here, and it's going to go through all of those granules, and in the end, it's going to build one big data frame and send it back to you. And so here we have that data frame here, GeoData frame 1, and if you print it, it looks like this. And so you get information about each of the bathymetry photons in ATL24. Now, when you make that call, it's the quick call, and it just gives you just bathymetry photons. So you'll see here in this data frame, all the classifications of the photons are 40. And I just saw, where can we get this? There should be a link provided later with the link to this example, and you can find this on our GitHub as well as other examples. And so here's the orthometric height of all the photons, the confidence that Chris was talking about, long track coordinate, and so forth. So if we plot that, you can see here's the shore, and we've got some really good bathymetry where it's shallower just on the North Shore of the Dominican Republic. And this is just using the GeoData frame plot to show what it looks like. So now, though, say you're interested in a single track, and you want to drill down on maybe one of these tracks here, along tracks that ISAT2 collected. So as I mentioned before, you can pass parameters into this service defining how you want to get the data. And so we're going to modify our request above, and we're going to add some parameters to the request. So the only thing we're changing is this right here. And we're saying, okay, give us only ground track 3R with the reference ground track of 202 and cycle 12. So now this goes out, and because we knew that we just wanted one thing, it correctly finds only one granule now, and it processes that granule, and it finds 861 bathymetry photons in that, and we get a smaller data frame now just with that one track. And if we plot that track, we can now see the bathymetry profile here. Okay, but as I mentioned before, we're just giving the basic information. There's a lot more information in ATL 24. And if you want that, you again can control that through the parameters. So now I've changed our request again. And because our parameters are getting a little bit more complex, I'm storing them in its own variable. So here now are our parameters. Here's the ones we added before. But now I'm going to say, give me everything. Don't filter on confidence, and give me all of the classified photons. So this says, give me all the columns. This says, don't do any confidence filtering. And this says, I want not just bathymetry, but also the unclassified and sea surface photons. So now we make that request, and it comes out. We process it, and now we have 35,000 photons. And this is the data frame. Not only do we have 35,000, but we also have more columns. So we have things like, was this collected at night? Was there a determination that the sensor depth was exceeded? What is the uncertainties? This is the vertical uncertainty. What was the height of the surface? Things like that. So all of the columns in ATL 24 are now, science columns are provided. And if we plot this, you'll see that now we don't just see the red photons that we saw above, the bathymetry photons, we see everything. We see the gray and we see the blue. The gray is unclassified here, the blue is sea surface. This is just looking at, Chris talked about this as well, where he shows the different confidence levels. I just did a quick plot that color codes based on confidence. So you can see here that the bathymetry has varying levels of confidence. The low bathymetry is anything under 0.6, the low confidence, sorry, and then above would be the high confidence bathymetry. So now there's a couple different ways though to access ATL 24. It's possible that you are used to working with ATL 03, the raw photon data, and you don't necessarily want to work directly with ATL 24. You want to keep working with ATL 03, but you just want to include the ATL 24 classifications in the ATL 03 data. And so we have a way of doing that. If you're used to using slide rule, this is exactly how it works with ATL 08. So we can do the same thing with using the ATL 08 classifications. So here we have almost the same request. I've changed a couple things. I've simplified the ATL 24 parameters. I'm asking for everything still. And I add a confidence. By default, our service for ATL 03 will only give you the high confidence photons, but I just wanted everything. So I dropped this down to -1. And then I keep the along track specifications. So now, and I make one other change. Instead of asking for the ATL 24X service, I'm asking for the ATL 03 service. So we run this, it goes out. And now instead of 35,000, we have 92,000 photons, because this is grabbing all of the photons from ATL 03, even the ones that weren't looked at by the ATL 24 algorithm. And you're like, well, which ones didn't it look at? You can see it very quickly in the plot. Our vertical range is much higher. So ATL 24 looks at about 150 meters around the surface of the sea surface. ATL 03, of course, includes all of the photons collected and telemetred from the instrument. And you'll see, if we look at the columns now in the data frame, these are ATL 03 columns. So we have things like the spacecraft velocity, the solar elevation, and so forth, the background rate, and so forth for the ATL 03 data. And we have overlaid on it ATL 24 class and the ATL 24 confidence. Right, so you can see this is where the ATL 24 labeled photons were, down here in the blue and the red. When we combine ATL 03 and ATL 24, we then get access to the types of services that are available to us with ATL 03. So here I'm doing a combined request where I'm asking for ATL 24 classifications on ATL 03, but I'm also doing some filtering. So one of our filters is we give the ability to run YAPC or pull the YAPC from version 6 and 7 granules and do filtering on that. So here I'm filtering on the ATL 03 confidence and the YAPC score, as well as classifying. And when we do that, we get a smaller data frame. We're dropping it down now to 20,000. And you can see we've cut out some of the bathymetry that didn't have the same density didn't have a high density score using the YAPC classifier. Why would you do this? I don't know. I'm just saying that all the tools available with ATL03 are available to you when you use ATL24. And here I'm just doing a plot of the bathymetry of these photons with the YAPC score. Almost second to last, when we do this, now we can also feed it into our custom algorithms. So maybe you're not interested at the photon level for ATL24. Maybe you just want a depth at some posting. So Ben Smith designed the ATL06 algorithm. And he's on the slide rule team, and he designed a version of his algorithm for slide rule to do surface fitting very efficiently. And we can run that surface fitting algorithm on any set of photons. And so here I have a request where I'm now only asking for bathymetry. And now I'm saying, please fit those photons to a resolution of 10 meters with 20-meter segments, and don't do any filtering. We just want exactly whatever the fit gives us, just give it right back to us. We're gonna not filter on confidence, and we're gonna just look at that one along track beam. And so we run this service and we come out, and now instead of getting a photon cloud, we get a posting of elevations. And so it's a smooth fit to the surface. So this is one way to look at depths that would not be using the raw photons that ATL24 provides, but fitting them to some surface and just working with that. And then lastly, I just wanted to show there are a bunch of ways that you can filter the ATL24 data if you want to go directly to it. When you probably saw in the data frame, or if you've looked at any of the granules, we have things like the confidence, the flags for not being able to retrieve a KD value or wind speed, whether it was at night, sensor depth exceeded, and then some of the non-science fields variables in the granule that are used for processing purposes. You can also pull them out as well if you'd like them. And so that's just showing that request there. And now we have our bathymetry with a bunch more columns that has been filtered by some of the things in these parameters. So that is using the Python client. Now I'm going to jump over to the web client. So the web client is brand new. We just went officially live with it. We've had a demo version for some time that we've been working on, but we just officially went live a couple weeks ago. And this is, our hope here is to provide an easy way to explore the data right now. And we're hoping in the next months to build out the features that this client provides so that it comes close to what the features that are in the Python client. Right now, it's really just retrieving the data, but we will be adding features via this advanced tab here to be able to build the types of requests that you saw with the Python client. So if I select the coastal bathymetry and I drill down to some area, so here I'm going to drill down to Haiti, and say I'm interested in this area here, so I'll just draw this area here. I can draw a little bit bigger. We limit the area to 1,000 square kilometers. If you need to make a bigger request, you have to use the Python client. This just prevents people from drawing across half a continent. So if we then run slide rule, it'll go out and make a processing request to slide rule, just like we saw in the Python client. And when it collects all of the results, it builds that geodata frame and it returns it back to the user. And when it's done, it will take us immediately over to this analysis view. And so this shows all of the tracks. I don't know if you remember from the Jupyter Notebook where you saw this type of plot. This is all of the different tracks. And now you can go and you can select the different tracks, and you can see over here, my WebEx thing is covering it. You can see over here the along track plot. So this is a plot of the orthometric heights, and it's color coded to the height. You can zoom in and zoom out with it. You can change what you're plotting. You can plot based on confidence. You can you can color code based on confidence. You can actually change in this plot configuration what things you can use, and then you can also do show photon cloud, which will pull the ATL03 data. And remember how I showed that we could get at this data two ways? Well, this overlays the ATL03 data, and now we see a lot more photons, and we can zoom in and see that same plot. Right now, I just will mention this is an ellipsoidal heights. We are working on fixing that so that this will also be consistently shown in orthometric heights. That was pointed out to us recently, and we're working on that fix. And again, you can change the colors. You can change how big the plotting points are. You have your legend right here. If you like what you see, you can export this. So this is exporting it as a Parquet file. We will be supporting CSV and LAS files in the future, but right now we just support the Parquet file. We have tooltips for hovering over the data to be able to see what exactly is being shown. Let me look here. And then, yeah, for those that are tech savvy, we have the ability to run your own SQL queries on the data and have a CSV output that you can then export. So then you can work with the data however you like and export it as a CSV. The client will save all of the requests that you've done. So you can see here, I've done some other plots here, and you can go to it. There's another way to see the data is if you go to the records tab. This is, again, all the requests that you've made, the size, and then the ability to export it, label it, or analyze it if you want to. And I think with that, I will turn it over.
All right, thanks, thanks, JP, and also thanks, Chris. Before I get started with this, I actually just want to thank both of you and all the teams that you work with, all the members of the teams that you work with. The work you're doing is absolutely great, and I will, based on my presentation today, I think you'll see why it's so valuable for me and other people like me. But just to play devil's advocate for a little bit, I'm gonna question, what the big deal is, as you will see on my slide here. Is it really worth it to have you and lots of other smart people spending a lot of time on this data just to tell us how deep the water is here and there, right? And didn't we sort of know that already in most cases? So I think the answer to that question is yes, we did already know that in many cases, but not in every case. And it turns out actually that there's some really interesting cases in which we didn't already know how deep the water is, and those can be important. So the goal with my part of this webinar is to give you some examples that illustrate the really quite amazing usefulness of ICESat-2 bathymetry data and how it can have really tangible value. I'll do it through explaining something called satellite-derived bathymetry. It's often abbreviated SDB, so if I just say SDB at some point, just remember it means satellite-derived bathymetry, which is the mapping of water depth using satellite imagery. So with an emphasis on imagery, so not using ICESat-2 directly, as we've talked about so far, but using a satellite image. So I'll start out with a bit of context for why that's something that's worth working on, and try to illustrate what some of the problems are that we have currently that ICESat-2 bathymetry and SDB can help us solve. So here's one example. On August 24th, 2018, the passenger vessel that you see here, the Academic Yoff, it ran aground on an uncharted underwater rock 78 nautical miles northwest of Kugaruk in Nunavut, which is in the Arctic Ocean, in an area that's almost entirely without any charted bathymetric information. So the vessel was refloated, and the more than 100 passengers, all of whom were uninjured, thankfully, they were evacuated the next morning. But their voyage was over, and the Akademik Jof had to undergo temporary repairs by a dive team, after which it could proceed to Quebec for dry docking and more extensive repairs. There was a bit of pollution, some oil spilled out into the environment. And the rock that caused this grounding is over 200 meters long and is clearly visible in satellite imagery as far back as 2016, so 2 years prior to the grounding. If we look at what that area in which the Akademik Jof grounded looks like, on the official chart provided by the Canadian Hydrographic Service, which is shown on the left here, we'll see that there's not much information provided on the bathymetry in the area. So if we focus within the red rectangle, about 5 kilometers to the northeast, just under the capital A that you see in the figure, you'll see that there's a single sounding saying that it's 71 meters deep here. Canadian charts use meters. And about 2 kilometers to the southwest, you'll see that there's another sounding that indicates 92 meters depth. But in between those two soundings, there is just no information, nothing. But if you look really closely at the satellite image of the same area, which is what you see on the right side of the figure, you may notice that there's a small and faint smudge near the center of the red rectangle. If we look at that smudge a bit more closely, we can see that it is in fact a shoal. Here it's shown in the middle of the red circle, using a Sentinel-2 satellite image as a background. And in fact, on this image, we see a few other shoals nearby as well that were not indicated on the official chart either. So throughout the Arctic Ocean, not just the Canadian part, but everybody's part of the Arctic Ocean, there's literally thousands of these shoals. They can be fairly large. They're all underwater, and the large majority of them, they're uncharted and they're effectively unknown. And they're unknown despite being visible on satellite imagery. As I mentioned earlier, this particular one that you see in the red circle is actually 200 meters long. So it's only unknown, or was only unknown, because nobody looked at this imagery before it was too late. Unless you think that the grounding of Akademik Jof was a freak once-in-a-lifetime occurrence, I can assure you these things happen surprisingly often. So here's another example. This one is from 2010, when the Clipper Adventurer, this vessel here, it ran into a huge uncharted shoal in Coronation Gulf, also in Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic Ocean. And it ran into the shoal during calm seas with clear visibility. So there weren't any kind of extraneous factors involved in this grounding. Thankfully, once again, all the passengers were uninjured, but they had to be evacuated from the vessel. And again, there was just a small amount of pollution that was reported. This one got stuck more solidly than Akademik Jof. It took multiple attempts over a 2-week period to refloat it, and ultimately it required major repairs. On this image, you get a sense of the size of the vessel, and you can actually see it sitting on the shoal in this image, which is why it's listing a little bit to the port. Here's the same situation seen from above, where the Clipper Adventurer is sitting there stuck on the shoal. Also, in this kind of situation, or this in the Clipper Adventurer situation, there wasn't much information on bathymetry available on the original chart back in 2010. There's a lot more information now on the updated chart because after the grounding, this area was really well surveyed. But in the chart at the time, which is what I'm showing here, you see just one line of soundings made by a survey vessel. It must have passed right between some of the shoals in the area. Again, if we look more closely at a satellite image of the grounding site, we see the shoal in the image quite clearly. It's what the white arrow is pointing to. And we can also see another shoal nearby. At the bottom half of this slide, I'm sort of hinting at the idea that we can use the imagery for more than just saying, look, there's a shoal, it looks shallow. Namely, that we can interpret the specific pixel colors in terms of how shallow the water is in the area. Here I've done that with an algorithm that suggests that the shallowest part of this shoal is 4 meters below chart datum, which is definitely not enough for a ship the size of the Clipper Adventurer to pass over that shoal safely. So ultimately what I'm trying to say here is that if we collectively were better at extracting information on water depth from satellite imagery, we could provide that information to the crews that are on these vessels. And whenever that led to avoiding one of these groundings, that would save a lot of money, a lot of pollution, and occasionally it would save lives. So how do we actually look at a satellite image and make an estimate of how deep the water is for any given pixel? So fundamentally, we have to establish what the relationship is between water depth and pixel color, which is quantified as the spectral reflectance of a pixel. Here's a diagram that outlines part of the physics that are involved. The arrows represent some of the different paths that sunlight can take to move from the sun down through the atmosphere, where it may be absorbed or scattered, through the water surface that may reflect it, into the water where it interacts with both the water itself and the different water constituents, possibly down to the seafloor, but it can also be absorbed or reflected, back up through the water surface and the atmosphere, and finally into the sensor where it gets measured. So there are two main takeaways from this diagram. The first one is it's kind of complicated because the sunlight interacts with a lot of different parts of the environment. And secondly, most of these paths, if you follow the arrows, most of the paths don't involve the sunlight ever interacting with the sea floor, meaning that that location of the sea floor, which indicates water depth, it only has a very small influence on the total signal measured by the sensor. One approach to SDB is to use our understanding of the physics involved to parameterize a model of this radiative transfer system and then invert that model to produce an estimate of water depth based on the signal that's measured at the sensor. And this can work okay. It's actually what I did in the previous slide when I mentioned that the shallowest part of the shoal is 4 meters deep. But because these measurements contain a lot of noise, all the indicated by all the arrows here that don't interact with the seafloor, and relatively little signal, it doesn't take much of a misspecification, like for example, of the type or density of aerosols in the atmosphere, to throw off the resulting estimate of water depth. So an alternative is to more or less ignore the physics that are involved, and instead establish an empirical relationship between water depth and pixel color for a given image. We can formalize that relationship using an equation, or more commonly, actually, some kind of machine learning model. Then, once we have established that relationship in a model form, we can use the model to make estimates of water depth for all pixels in the image, including those for which water depth was never actually measured. So to do this, in addition to the reflectance values that we can get straight from the image, we need point measurements of water depth. So we can create a table like the one I've shown here, in which each row represents a single pixel for which reflectance and water depth are both known. I think you can tell where this is going with respect to ICET2. Once we have this kind of table filled in, we use the data to train the model to understand what the relationship is between the reflectance values and the water depth. So yes, this is where the ICET2 data comes in, because for many parts of the world, ICET2 is the only, or sometimes the only recent, source of point measurements of water depth. So here's an example of what this kind of approach can look like in practice. The image here is, again, it's a Sentinel-2 image from Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. As you can see, the approach to Cambridge Bay involves navigating through an area with quite a lot of shoals, because the port is right around where it says Cambridge Bay on the image here. I've also shown you in this image a bunch of colored dots. They represent the individual photons, the individual bathymetric photons retrieved from a single ISAT2 overpass. I should preface this by saying I didn't use the ATL24 product or any of the great tools that JP talked about because they weren't available by the time I did this work. But if I were to redo this now, I would absolutely use that. Once you have these two data sets co-located, the image and the bathymetry photons from ISAT2, the idea is to extract the reflectance information from the pixels that also have a bathymetric photon. And then we use all that data in combination to fill in a table like the one I showed, and then train a machine learning model that can use the relationship it has learned from all the data to make predictions of water depth for the rest of the image, including for all those shoals that you can see that you definitely want to avoid if you're sailing into or out of Cambridge Bay. The first thing you should probably do when you have data like this is what I'd call a sanity check. Just have a look at the ISAT2 data and the satellite image in combination, one overlaid on the other, and check that there are no obvious errors, because these things do creep in. So here I've done that by zooming into an area. I'm using color to display the water depth of each bathymetric photon here. And I think you'll agree with me that it looks okay for now. Clearly the shallowest photons, which are shown in red, are located close to shore, so that makes sense. And the ISAT2 data are telling us that the water gets deeper with the more bluish points here, but the further from shore we go. So it's not a perfect quality check, but at least there are no obvious problems, so we can kind of proceed to the next step. So I know Chris showed some estimations of the accuracy of the bathymetric data that you get out of the ATL24 product. Again, that wasn't available when I did this work, so I've done something similar. We have from this area, we have some multi-beam data and some airborne LiDAR data that were shared with me by the Canadian Hydrographic Service. And we can compare the ISAT2 derived bathymetry to that data. And so I think, again, you'll agree with me that it looks pretty okay here. We have the ISAT2 derived depths on the y-axis of these two plots here, and then we have the multi-beam echo sounder data on the left x-axis and the airborne LiDAR bathymetry data on the right x-axis. The mean absolute differences between the ISAT2 data and these two other data sets, they're on the order of 60 to 70 centimeters. So that's not too different from what Chris showed for the ATL24 product. And it's certainly good enough to proceed with using this data in an SDV workflow. When we extract the reference values for all the pixels that also have water depth measured by ISAT2, and we get something like this, and I apologize that it's a little ugly, but the idea is the same as in the previous table I showed. B1 here, it refers to the surface reflectance in band 1 that we extract from the satellite image. Band 1 measures really shortwave blue light around 443 nanometers. B2 is the same, just with the other blue band that measures radiance at around 492 nanometers, and so on. And in this particular instance, I've ignored bands that measure into the infrared spectrum because the water is such a strong absorber there. We don't get a lot of return information from the seafloor. In this example, I actually have over 2,000 rows of data, which is nice for training any kind of machine learning model. I'm just showing you the first few ones here. Then if we use this data to train a machine learning model, here I've just used a random forest model because it's quick and easy to do. You could use any kind of what most people would call AI these days. Once we do that, we get the ability to make pretty good predictions of water depth on the basis of the pixel reflectance in those 5 bands from the table. So how good are those predictions? So to test it, what I've done here is I've just randomly split all my data using 70% of my table rows to train the model and the remaining 30% to make predictions with the model and then compare those predictions to what ICET2 measured. And again, we get a pretty decent fit here. The mean absolute difference between the SDB predictions that are on the y-axis and the ICET2 measurements that are on the x-axis is 82 centimeters. So this is kind of important information to know if you're going to apply the resulting bathymetric map for a given purpose. For some people, 82 centimeters is not good enough, and they would just not use it for anything. And for others, it might be perfectly fine. What happens when we actually then apply this, again, in my case, random forest model, to every pixel in the original image, excluding the ones on land? It ends up looking something like this. So on this image here, the shallow water is shown in red color, gradually changing through yellow and green to red, to blue for the deepest water. And I've included the ICET2 data points here again to illustrate how this SDB process has allowed us to take the information provided by those relatively few points with their limited geographic coverage of the area and extrapolate it to the rest of the image to achieve what I'm going to call complete bathymetric coverage, but it's only complete for the areas that are shallow enough that I will explain a little bit more in a second. Because for the deepest areas, where sunlight reflecting off the bottom is not detectable in the satellite image, and often not in ICET2 data either, for those areas, there's no longer an actual relationship between water depth and pixel reflectance, right? We can't tell if we look at a really, really deep, dark pixel, can't tell if the water is 50 meters deep or 1,000 meters deep. The relationship is gone. The original machine learning model tends to produce SDB estimates around 15 meters for those pixels. And that's just because those areas look like some of the deepest areas that we got ICET2 data for. So in practice, we need to delete the estimates for the very deep water, as I've done here, and only retain the shallower estimates. But I like this slide because it points out the coverage of the ICET2 data, and I understand I've just used a single overpass here. If you used the very nice ATL24 product, you would have a lot more data, but you'd still not have this complete geographic coverage. There would still be shoals in the area that had never been measured by an ICET2 data point. And by using this SDB process, we can extrapolate what we understand about the relationship between water depth and pixel color to the whole image. So this whole SDB process, where's it useful? Areas that already have great coverage of high quality data, they don't need this, right? But there are large parts of the world that don't have lots of good data already. And for those areas, SDB trained with ICET2 data is sometimes the best or the only available source of information on bathymetry. So my examples here, they've all been from the Arctic Ocean because it has such a poor coverage of high quality and recent data. Here's another example from the Arctic Ocean. So here we're in Hudson's Bay. We're near the southeastern part of Hudson's Bay in a group of islands called Sanikiluaq, where there's almost no in situ bathymetry data available. The people who live here, they hunt a lot, and they use the nearshore waters for transportation. And the official charts that I'm not showing here, but like in my other examples, they contain mostly just empty white space. So for the people who live here, I was able to go through this entire SDB process, calibrate a machine learning model using the ICET2 data that are shown here in the colored points, and produce a bathymetric map that has a pretty good accuracy, at least for waters up to 5 meters depth, which is all that the local population needs because their boats don't have a draft that's any deeper than that. I've also used SDB technology to help actually the Canadian Hydrographic Service update some of their charts for the Arctic around the southern part of Baffin Bay. And this is not just me, there's a lot of people working along the same lines. It's done by other hydrographic offices, including NOAA and UK and France as well. So one thing is these remote areas of the world that have just never been surveyed or never been surveyed well. ISAT-2 data and satellite imagery in combination, they can also be used to provide relatively rapid updates on bathymetry for areas that may have changed since the last survey. That can include areas with a lot of sediment transport. For example, I'm doing some work in the St. Lawrence River right now. Or it can include areas that have experienced storms or even earthquakes. So for example, in 2023, I helped produce some bathymetric maps for a German scientific expedition to Krakatoa, the Indonesian volcano, which is very famous for its 1883 eruption. So the whole area here is geologically very active. But thankfully, recent ISAT-2 data and recent satellite imagery that I'm showing you here again with the image and the colored dots. They were available for me to map the bathymetry in the area and help this scientific expedition navigate safely in and around this area. So I hope I illustrated how ISAT-2 data can be used in combination with satellite imagery in an SDB workflow to provide maps of bathymetry that are really useful and complement the information we might get from more local surveys that tend to provide better information or more accurate information, but are also much more costly. Especially we can cover that gap there that Chris showed between the land and the well-surveyed areas. If you want to know more about SDB or you're working in an area where you think this could be beneficial to you, feel free to get in touch. My contact information is here, and I'm sure it'll be shared as well via this webinar. So I'm going to throw it back to you, Jennifer, for the next session.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And so, Amy, if you wouldn't mind sharing that resources slide again, that'd be great. While you're doing that, I'm going to open up the final poll and then jump directly to the Q&A. And so I pulled out the 2 questions that were posed in the chat. And so I'm going to just jump right in here, and then you can determine amongst yourselves, which of you will respond to that question. So the first question is it possible to obtain beach profiles with ISAT-2 data? And then actually, there's another question, and I can't recall if this is from the same participant, but the related question is, how do I adjust this code for the beach, only the surfaced beach profile, and then the submerged one with the bay? So I think the first would be, is it possible to obtain beach profiles with ISAT-2 data?
I can take that, I guess, and then maybe JP or others can jump in. Yes, so in ATL 24, we weren't specifically looking at beach profiles, but a lot of times the nearshore areas are included. But if you want to be able to merge ATL 24 or ISAT-2 bathymetry with ATL 03, the geolocated photon clouds that have all the areas, including beach, or potentially to be able to merge with other products like ATL 08, I think some of the slide rule tools, the functionality that JP showed, would be great for being able to merge land elevations and submerged topography, aka bathymetry, to get, for example, a seamless topobathy profile. Anything to add to that, JP?
Oh yeah, we support the ATL 06 and the ATL 08 and the ATL 03, as you said.
And so I think what I can do, since our previous ISAT-2 data training webinar focused on the land and vegetation height products, and there was also a slide rule demonstration as well, perhaps we can follow up with this participant offline and provide some additional information. And I think unless there is a quick answer to the related question, it might be a good idea to follow up offline as well. And so again, that question was, JP, how can I adjust this code for the beach? Only the surfaced beach profile, and then the submerged one with the bay. And so it sounds like that might be something that requires a bit more explanation that we address offline, unless you have a response for that here.
No, yeah, if you could facilitate getting us connected, I'd be happy to help out.
Sure, absolutely. I will do that. All right. So with that, let me go ahead and jump down to the Q&A here. Okay. So I'm not going to read the questions that have been answered within the Q&A with a typed response from either a speaker or a panelist. You should be able to reference that regardless of when you joined the webinar, if you were, came in a little bit later. All right, so let's see here. If you'll bear with me, I need to scroll down a little bit here. All right. Thanks for bearing with me. Let's see some early on questions. Okay, so the next question here is, is there a data dictionary available for slide rule earth columns?
We do have,
Lisa responded to this here. NSIDC DAC provides data dictionaries for ISAT2 data products. ATL 24 is here. So my apologies, I didn't realize there was a response already. Okay, since several people actually asked this question, would this product be able to provide a rough estimate of a lake's? And I know there are some responses to the lake bathymetry question, but I think it might be worth repeating verbally aloud to the participants. So the question is, would this product be able to provide a rough estimate of a lake's bathymetry similar to how it's done for coastal shorelines?
So answering in terms of ATL 24, ATL 24 specifically does not include inland water bodies, because that is a separate data product called ATL 13. So everyone who's interested in inland water bodies, I would definitely encourage you to check out the ATL 13 data product, which is also available from NSIDC. And JP, anything you want to add to that from a slide rule perspective?
No, and then I would just call attention to the response in the Q&A. And I do see that JP did provide some information about there being limited support for that product. So the next question is, could you please elaborate a bit on the datum used for the orthometric heights?
Sure, I can take that one too. So ATL 24 provides orthometric heights based on the EGM08 geoid model. And then for people who want to be able to transform to other vertical datums, including tidal datums or chart datums, for examples like hydrographic surveying or nautical charting, as Honest pointed out, there are vertical datum transformation tools available in the US. NOAA's VDatum is a great tool for that. And other countries have similar things. In the UK, there's the Vertical Offshore Reference Frame, or VOR software. I believe both Australia and Canada have other vertical datum transformation tools. But from ATL 24, the two options for vertical datums, we provide WGS 84 ellipsoid heights and then orthometric heights based on EGM08.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. And also thanks, JP, for your responses to the earlier questions. And so there is a very specific question regarding the orthometric datum. And the question is EGM 2008 or 2008, however you would reference it in this context, the orthometric datum that's being used?
Yes, so I think that was the same, maybe just a variant of the same question. But yeah, our orthometric heights are based on EGM08, also known as EGM 2008, correct.
Perfect, thank you. And then one of the questions I'll actually take, and so there were a couple of questions about whether or not this webinar has been recorded. Yes, I record all of our data training events. They'll be posted to the NASA Earth Data YouTube channel, and I will send an email with links to the slides that were used within today's presentation, as well as to the recording from this afternoon's event. So yes, you'll be able to access this content at your leisure if you'd like to go back and take a look at anything that was presented today. And so let me scroll down a little bit here. Okay, the next question is, how can satellite-derived bathymetry techniques be optimized to accurately assess seabed characteristics in turbid water environments, particularly considering the challenges posed by suspended sediments on optical signal quality?
Maybe Anis
Yeah.
wants to take that one? Yeah.
That one might be for me. Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a real challenge. And of course, the examples that I showed didn't have a lot of turbidity in them. So, kind of like what Chris mentioned with with each overpass, sometimes you get good data, sometimes you don't. For many environments, you can find the occasional image where it's less turbid or not turbid at all. So that's one approach. The challenge I've run into more so is that you have some areas that are just always turbid, in which case your approach has to be the same as for deep water, to just say it's not going to work here. You did ask specifically about seabed characteristics in turbid environments, so not necessarily just the water depth, but I'm not sure exactly what characteristics you mean, but let's say maybe seafloor habitat. That is even more difficult, I'll say. Just send me an email if you want to talk more about that. That's very complicated.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Anis. And the next question is, there's a comment combined with a question. The slide rule tool. The slide rule is a totally amazing tool. I have a doubt while looking the data in a straight line in slide rule. Is it possible to show spatially with a lat and longitude values to understand bathymetry and surface elevations?
I'm not 100% clear on what's being asked. Is there a way to provide some more information? The two views that we have are a map view that uses the lat long and then a long track view. And that's just a convenience as plotted from the data. So we provide that data. That data is available in the H5 granule, as well as in the data frame that's returned back to the web client.
The question, JP, was how to go back and forth between a long track distance and a corresponding lat long.
Okay. Yeah, if when in the analysis view, the view on the left is your lat long, and the long track plot is highlighted in red, and so you can see which a long track plot is being plotted in the scatter plot to the right. One of the enhancements that we're working on, and really I just want to call out Carlos Ugarte is one behind the web client. He's done an amazing job. One of the things he's working on is to have those two plots coordinated, where if you hover over a point, it'll highlight it on the map view for you, and vice versa. That's something that we're going to be providing in the coming months.
Okay, thank you, JP. And at this point, I do see there are additional questions in the chat, some of which have been responded to. But I did notice one a moment ago. You just bear with me for a moment. Are there any plans for a successor to ICESat-2? ICESat-3, for example? We might not have a response to that today, but I don't know if anyone from NSIDC or anyone on the call wants to weigh in. I don't know of any current plans for an ICESat-3. Anybody else?
I'm not aware of any either.
I think that was Lisa.
Yeah, this is Walt Meyer. There isn't ISAT-3 specifically. There is some discussions with Israel, the NASA decadal survey about potential laser altimetry, um, but I don't think anything, as far as I know, anything's been decided yet.
Well, thanks so much, Walt. All right, let me, oh, thanks. I see that you responded there as well. Okay, I think, let me jump back down to the Q&A. And we're about 5 minutes left in the, okay, I do see one. So the next question is for Anas, is your machine learning code publicly available?
It's not currently, but I will happily make it so. It's honestly not very difficult. So I could, yeah, no, I can do that pretty quickly. I haven't done it yet, but I'll happily do it.
Okay, so I've done a couple of different scans just to see if there are any questions that have not been responded to with a typed response or that we haven't already addressed within the Q&A. I do see something here. Okay, so the next question is, that just came in. Can ice-based data given in ATL-24 be distinctive for underwater structures such as subglacial lake or sub-ice shelf cavity?
I'm not seeing the question. I would say it really depends on the size of the feature. And thinking about the spatial resolution of ISAT-2 data. So along a particular track, you get about 70 centimeter a long track resolution along a particular line. And so if you're capturing bathymetry all along that, that would be sort of the upper limit on the along track resolution, and then a cross track really varies. I didn't really talk about this, but ISAT-2 collects data along so three track lines, or there's basically 6 beams separated into 3 beam pairs, each of which is comprised of a strong beam and a weak beam. So you can kind of imagine these 3 beam pairs kind of traveling along, in the along track distance can be variable along any individual ground track. The outer beams are about 3 kilometers separated from the center beam. And then just depending on water clarity and the ground tracks determines that cross track spacing. So I would say it really just depends on the size of the feature that you're trying to detect, water clarity, and how many overpasses you have, whether you'll be able to detect that structure or not.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And we've probably got time, just a quick response to a question that kind of falls outside of the scope of this webinar. So in terms of astronomy webinars or content, I am happy to follow up with this participant offline. I am not aware of any that might be taking place, however, they might be. And so I will reach out to colleagues in a different NASA division and get back to you with hopefully some resources that might help you with that topic. And then we do have one final question here, and then let's see, reposting my questions here, general questions for all. Has any other federal agencies, NOAA, been using ISAT-2, ATL-24, others for seafloor or bathymetry? It's looking pretty good for seafloor up to 30 meters. Is there a broader effort to get bathymetry for more than 30 meters? I'm thinking something similar to radar altimetry and then derive gravity field.
Very briefly, I know that NOAA colleagues have been looking at using ATL-24 and more broadly ISAT-2 data in the NOAA SAT-BATHY tool. And I also have USGS colleagues, including, I think I saw that maybe Monica Polishano Lovejoy was a participant who've also been using ISAT2 bathymetry. In terms of merging with other bathymetric data sets that cover deeper waters, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic use of ISAT2 and ISAT2 aided SDB is being able to merge those shallow water areas where we're filling in the gaps, like I showed in my presentation, with bathymetry that exists further offshore, which includes multi-beam echo sounding data, and then things like gravity derived bathymetry to really create a comprehensive view of bathymetry for the full Earth.
All right, well, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you to all of our speakers and Q&A panelists who joined from the NSIDC DAC this afternoon. And more importantly, thanks to just a second, Amy, and thanks to all of our webinar participants for joining us. We really appreciate your time this afternoon. And so, Amy, you had a question.
No, I was trying to hit one of the other reactions and I hit the hand by accident. So
Okay.
false alarm.
That's okay. That's okay. So thanks to all of you for a great webinar this afternoon. I really appreciate you. And yeah, you can stay tuned. I'm not sure what the next ISAT2 webinar topic will be, but we do have a NASA Worldview sort of data discovery and visualization and access webinar on the 16th next week. If you look at the Earth Data website, earthdata.nasa.gov, if that interests you, it's a way to access over 1,000 data imagery layers across the NASA data centers in near real time. So with that, we will leave the virtual meeting space opened, but log off from the audio component. And so if you think of something, feel free to ask that question in the chat or the Q&A, and I will be sure to send the logs to our speakers and our Q&A panelists. All right, everybody, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care now. All right, goodbye, everybody.
Jennifer, thanks, Amy.
Thank
Thanks
you.
to all the participants.
Thank you.